Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel where we talk about stuff. And there's a lot to talk about because everything seems to be once again happening at the exact same gosh darn time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Yeah. So what we currently have is a situation where everyone believes that things are happening. And at the moment, we are all kind of waiting and anticipating these things to actually take place. I know that sounds weird, but that's because it is. The biggest hype right now around the world has to do with the potential current and then future rate cuts from the Federal Reserve of the United States of America. One of the biggest sentiments and ideas is that if the Fed does indeed continue to lower rates as is expected, and also begins to do quantitative easing, QE, that we could be in the running for some great months ahead. If you haven't seen any economic forecasts and outlook, they're all kind of all over the place because you do have the negative Nancy's on one side, but then on the other side you do have a lot of people who think that the recent dips that we've been seeing have kind of been more or less a retest of certain lows. Remember, we were just talking about this as far as like Bitcoin and how far it dipped and the rest of the market. And like we essentially, Bitcoin didn't go down to $30,000. Like there were barriers and levels that Bitcoin would bounce off of. The same exact thing with the crypto market. We're still getting a huge influx of altcoin season news. I'm going to push that one to the side. It's not that it's not important. If Bitcoin goes to 115, 120, 130,000, we're of course going to have altcoins perform well as well. One of the major stories revolving right now has to do with the Fed lowering interest rates. Now, here's the other interesting part for everyone out there. It's this idea of Bitcoin's fair value. How much is Bitcoin actually worth? This was a bit of a topic of discussion years ago revolving around the idea of what Bitcoin was and what Bitcoin can do. We were lied to several times by banks and institutions who kept on telling us that Bitcoin had no value, which of course is nonsense. And I said years ago, if Bitcoin is moving around hundreds of millions of dollars per day just through its chain alone, 24 hours a day around the planet, that has some kind of value. The number is not zero. You factor in how many people are mining Bitcoin, how many people are buying Bitcoin, how many people are holding, how many wallets, how many active users. There are people around the world who use Bitcoin for everyday activities. We've had news about that before from a portion of Latin America as well as Africa now. They're using Bitcoin as like I know it sounds weird, but as like a savings comparative to their local currencies, which are destroyed, but also people are actually using it in everyday commerce. So the idea of what Bitcoin is worth, what its fair value is, and where Bitcoin's going to go is, of course, a very huge topic. We also have had a non-stop flow of news the last couple of months regarding Bitcoin's price, where it's going to be at the end of the year. And if you also missed it, this idea of an everlasting market stopper. I tried to say gobstopper, but it didn't really work. Basically, the idea of like the market kind of not going through a bear market anymore. We've heard constantly over and over that because of the current market structure, because of the current buyers of Bitcoin, how few sellers we currently have, the ETFs, which show no signs of slowing down with their accumulation. Yes, we have some days with outflows, but then the inflows bring us right back to where we previously were. That the game has basically changed, and that any downflows we see in price would be quickly scooped up by whales, which is what we also saw a couple of days ago when we had that like really weird downturn and everyone was talking about Bitcoin's going lower, and then it rose by like $8,000, I think in like a 2 or something hour period. So here's the other one. And I mean, and I'll be realistic with you, it is nice to be in a market that sometimes gets pummeled, that is, thrown against the wall, if you will, and people count it out to still hear constantly this idea based on charts and metrics that Bitcoin will not only be just fine, but is also still going to move up. And we're not going to have that discussion now about 2026, but don't forget all the things that we know are going to happen in 2026 with like integration and usage and yada yada. None of that has changed. That's what I always find interesting about cryptocurrency news and prices. We can get a steady flow of banks buying, countries buying, blah blah blah, all these kinds of things. 340 days in a row, prices fall by 12%, people begin to panic and start leaving the market. All those things that we heard over the course of this year are still going to take place and still going to happen. So anyway, throwing ourselves at it. This has to do with what I guess or assume we're calling Metcalfe law or Metcalfe value or Metcalfe modeling. It has to do with Bitcoin's movements in price and the previous movements that would lead to the future ones. It sounds lightly confusing, it is, but the idea basically is that we can usually tell, how over the course of a 3-year period, if we have what we call a bear market, you can usually tell, okay, Bitcoin's bear markets last for this long. And then once you get to this day, we enter then what would be known as the bull run, as Bitcoin falls down from 60,000 to 13,000, bear. Bitcoin on that date goes from 13,000 to 25. We have re-entered a new bull cycle. That's kind of the idea. So basically, apparently, recently dropped under the Metcalfe network value. That's what it's being called, which has shown, according to this and according to what I found looking around, represents the idea that if Bitcoin falls too low or falls beneath a certain point, it typically then begins to move up quite rapidly. If you missed at all the last couple of days, the optimism, as I said, regarding future price movements for Bitcoin has not waned. It has not disappeared. It is still quite strong as ever. What's his name? Arthur Hayes recently, a week ago, announced that he still thinks that Bitcoin is going to 200. I know. He still thinks it's going to $250,000 this year. The heads of the industry, the big ones in the crypto space, all are reiterating that they think any drops that we've seen are the result of other things. I particularly believe it has to do with coordinated nonsense so that these institutions and governments can buy more at cheaper prices. But the idea then becomes, once those coins get scooped up, which they were, that prices would move back up. This idea has to do with Bitcoin has did briefly drop under the Metcalfe network value. And it says historically, when that has happened, Bitcoin then has a 12-month moving period, where prices begin to go back up. and it has historically delivered a 132% average price increase. Now, I know things are all over the place, and this is why we're having this little discussion. It's because we have actually seen this multiple times before as we've gone over. If this is your first December here in the cryptocurrency space, welcome. It tends to happen all the time. It's the same exact thing in September, October, November, where me and you are discussing the charts that people are talking about. And they're like, historically, Bitcoin has done this in November. Historically, like that kind of thing. We're kind of seeing the same loop again. And this would then tie into all of these people talking about that Bitcoin is basically going to have an extended bull run. If you manage to miss that, you're a genie, because it was literally news every single day within this market since around like March or April. The institutions are here. The governments are here. They show no real signs of letting up. There's also a lot of like quiet, private Bitcoin purchases happening as well. Not everything is someone standing at a podium. A lot of this is also taking place behind the scenes or quietly through the chain. We can still see the same wallet addresses buying 100 Bitcoin, 200 Bitcoin every single day. We notice that when there are outflows of Bitcoin from Coinbase, Binance, or Kraken, they're usually going to these big wallet addresses as well. Even crazier, in the last 10 days, 10 days, 10 days, as we experience what would be the end of the mega swoop down in price, 10 days, 50,000 Bitcoin left the hands of retail. 50,000 Bitcoin was sold, got rid of, put onto exchanges, sell order, moved to somewhere else. And those coins actually ended up going to the long-term holder supply. We know that long-term holders are out there basically, oh my toe, what did I do? Are basically out there based off of a number of metrics. This is usually a wallet address that has purchased Bitcoin, is still holding Bitcoin, has never sold Bitcoin, or typically has more Bitcoin in their wallet for longer than 6 months or a year. Usually the metrics say after 6 months or a year, if the Bitcoin is sitting there and more Bitcoin keeps getting piled on top, they might not have any interest in actually selling. So once again, as prices went down, we saw 50,000 Bitcoin shift hands once again into the hands of the people who've been holding for a long time. Trying to find it. There's another interesting part somewhere around here. Right. Historically, periods when Bitcoin has just traded below its Metcalfe value, Bitcoin then has delivered strong forward returns. A 12-month performance in these conditions has usually been positive 96% of the time, with an average gain of 132% for Bitcoin. In addition, long-term holder supply has increased significantly over the past 10 days by approximately 50,000 Bitcoin. And then they go on to explain the long-term holders and how this usually is a very strong indicator that these people have no intention of selling and we're basically looking for cheaper coins. I do not know exactly the real cause of the dip, but I said before and I'll say it again, I've been here for far too long to kind of think it's haphazard or random or everyone just kind of panicked all at once out of nowhere, as opposed to this was probably another coordinated action. It's the same exact thing for stocks and stuff as well. People forget that. If you get a chance, I started talking about it at the beginning of the year because I can't understand why other people wouldn't find this news interesting. It's the number 88%. Remember it at all? There are 3 companies. You can Google it. 3 companies who own 88% of the US stock market. They've done this over the course of a 20 to 30 something year period, but this is how you accumulate all of the assets. And also, a lot of times you kind of initiate a drop in prices. You put panic and fear. If you've ever paid attention to financial news over the years, they shall not be named, but a particular bank has gone onto the news to tell people on CNBC, MSNBC, ABC, and all these other things, yeah, we're expecting markets to drop, like we're thinking of selling a bunch of our positions in this company and that so and so. Things aren't looking too, I mean, really over and over and over. And when people hear this particular person talk, they get scared. He runs one of the largest banks, and then wouldn't you know it, 6 weeks later, they've made 38% profit, 42% profit, because everyone else sold expecting this big bank to sell. They got afraid. The bank bought up all the shares that hit the market at a reduced price. And now the bank gets richer. It's the same exact thing with crypto. I mean, it's not me telling you to not be afraid or to be wary of things, but a lot of the times within this space, it's usually, and I mean, if we can be honest with ourselves, we have governments buying Bitcoin. They want it for themselves. The US dollar looks like it's going to falter in some form or fashion. These companies buying at the beginning of the year, they have not stopped. We're not hearing about them as often in the news, but they're still on the same exact course. So what happens if you realize that something that was 100,000, 120,000 could potentially go to $1 million? You're probably going to do whatever you need to do to spook a lot of people out of the market so that you can accumulate it for yourself. That's just kind of how things 50,000 Bitcoin shifting hands in less than 2 weeks over like light panic and fear and stuff like that in the market. It all fits together, at least in my brain, but we'll see what ends up happening. As of right now, as I stated before, looking around in general, there's a lot of positive news, if you will, for Bitcoin and crypto. A lot of people think prices are going higher. A lot of people are expecting great things. I've seen more than a handful of people talking about that by the end of this year, Bitcoin's going to be here. This is going to happen. And then the optimism for next year, once again, is resting heavily on the shoulders of a 1% interest rate and the Fed basically printing trillions of dollars that would logically benefit asset holders, but we will definitely see. Yeah, interesting times ahead regardless. No matter what happens, it's going to be fascinating as we see this all unfold and as we move closer to 2026. I do hope that you've all enjoyed. I do hope you all are having a great day, a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, wherever you might be. There we go. I do hope it's absolutely fantastic. Thank you all once again for watching, listening, liking, commenting, and supporting. And I will most certainly be talking to you all soon. See you.